Thank you very much for joining us at 4 o'clock this afternoon for our third webinar in the Delivering AI for the NHS webinar series. The topic today is NHS in the driving seat, building a clinically led AI ecosystem. I've got a really interesting panel joining me today. So we've got Seb, who's the Deputy Director of the AI Centre from King's College London. We've got Harris, the Head of Clinical Scientific Computing. We've got George, CTO from the AI Centre. We have Sarah Blake, who is a clinical AI fellow, actually working with the AI Centre. And we've also got David from NVIDIA. I'm Yasmin Simchkin. I'm the Senior Programme Manager with DigitalHealth.London, who's been doing some work with the AI Centre. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll hand over to Seb for our first 10-minute presentation.
Thank you, Yasmin, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Seb Ourselin. I'm the Deputy Director of the AI Centre. I'm delighted to see so many people online today, and I'm going to try to give you a very brief overview about our AI Centre, and especially how do we engage with different key stakeholders. And I will start by thanking, first of all, our founders, Innovate UK, who has been really key of making those centers happening across the country. Next slide, please. So the mission of our centers has been really to support the technology development of how can you make AI a reality into an hospital? How do you build the AI-enabled hospital? I think we have seen a lot of hype about artificial intelligence and how AI is going to transform healthcare. And I think perhaps we have somehow didn't put that much effort about the challenge of the informatics behind and the integration of AI into an hospital setting. And this is really where we have, we believe, made a substantial contribution, which will be part of our legacy, is to really build those platforms which enable us to convert the NHS hospitals into AI-enabled hospitals. And this is really, for us, the main driver. And if we have those platforms in place, then not only will be able to access data easily across many hospitals, but we'll be able to link them, we'll be able to train at scale, and we'll therefore be able to deliver those new models using those data into the NHS. And very importantly, we want to make sure that we do that with a privacy-preserving model, that we are doing this securely and in a robust manner. Next slide, please. So our AI Centre has been growing quite substantially over the years, and we have now over 34 partners, of which we include 11 NHS trusts. Most of them has been around the southeast of the country, but we have started to reach out many other colleagues, and I'm pleased to mention that the last NHS trust which actually joined our partnership is in Birmingham, and we will continue to support and to deploy and to extend our partnership into many trusts across the country. We have as well 4 key universities who are supporting the innovation and the development of some of our key technology. Lead university is King's College London, but we're working very closely with Imperial College London, Queen Mary, and in our new phase, which has been funded by the Office of Life Sciences, we have been joined as well by University College London. So you've got 4 of some of the largest research-intensive universities across London working together. We have, as of today, 17 industry partners. Some of them are spin-out and startups, and I will come back to this later. It's a very innovative environment, and we need to be reactive and working closely with innovators. And some of them are actually large multinationals. And one in particular has been extremely supportive and put a huge amount of investment into this. And that's namely actually 2 of them, that namely Siemens Healthineers and NVIDIA. And I'm pleased to see David part of our panel, and thanks again NVIDIA for their great contribution towards the delivery of our center. Then you can see many other companies here that are part of the partnerships, and of course the Health Innovation Network has been as well a key contributor. Next slide, please. So if we really look into the back office of an AI-enabled hospital, you will need to solve all of those challenges which are on the left-hand side, which are actually not usually talked too much about, perhaps because it's perhaps simple to talk about how the model is going to revolutionize healthcare rather than how are you going to collect, standardize the data that you need to use for your model, how are you going to enable safety and privacy into the development of your model, but as well into the access of those data. How are you going to enable a national patient opt-out implementation, making sure that if a patient today is willing to be part of the development of a model, then they still have the choice to opt out. And we can actually make sure that we are keeping this privacy opt-out model in place, even in retraining some of the model. How are we going to validate? I think validations has been a huge topic, and the previous incarnation of a large program called NHS has put a huge amount of effort into supporting the validations aspect of some of those AI models. And we have now in our center developed an AI evaluation unit, which as well is a core foundation of making sure that AI can become a reality within the NHS. And then once you have done, you have access to those data, you need to train. You need to train your model, and then you need to test it, and you need to deploy it. And the deployment of AI for patient care is a very important component and can become quite cumbersome. Most of the situations end up by having to deploy a new server, having to deploy a new piece of informatics for every single model. And this is not scalable, certainly not feasible in the current work environment. You want to actually develop a marketplace, like you have an app on your iPhone. You want to have an AI marketplace when you will have all of your AI model available into one single environment. And you want to make sure that we can be robust and follow all of the different standards which are required, not only from a regulatory point of view, but as well from an international landscape point of view. We want to make sure that what we developed within the UK can be of benefit to all patients globally. And so we work closely with the MHRA, which is a UK regulator, which enable us to become compatible as well with the EU setting. We work with BSI. We work as well with an open source platform development that we jointly have been leading with NVIDIA called Monai, which enable us to standardize the different AI algorithms that you develop within our AI center. And more importantly, we want to develop an infrastructure which is scalable across different hospitals, knowing that all hospitals have different informatics infrastructure, which is again a reason why we need to be holistic to the type of informatics we have, and we can actually scale up across the country and take advantage of all of the data which are hosted by those hospitals. Next slide, please. I'm giving you three, I would say, key exemplars about what does that mean for a patient. It means that we should be able to, and we are able to provide a safer, more accurate planning of complex surgical procedures. For instance, on the left-hand side, you've got a robotic procedures, which is undertaken on the patients having a partial nephrectomy done on the kidney. So it's a tumor which you want to resect on the kidney while sparing the kidney. More than 75% now of those surgery are done robotically in the UK. Is becoming really the best way right now to do this application. And if you do it with keyhole surgery with robotic, therefore you've got very limited visibility. So having an accurate surgical planning using preoperative data and having this presented during the robotic surgery is actually adding a lot of value, not only from a safety point of view, but for an accuracy of the gesture done during the surgery. And this has been deployed in many trusts, and I'm pleased to say that it has been as well procured by one of our trusts for these specific procedures, and it's led by one of a spin-out, which is part of the AI center called Insight. Another great exemplar is from Mirada Medical, who have developed in close collaboration with our cancer center at Guy's, radiotherapy planning solutions which enable you to have an automatic delineation of the different structures that you want to target with radiotherapy, but as well as the structures that you want to avoid. In radiotherapy, it's actually even more important to avoid some structures, as well as maximizing the dose that you will apply with your radiotherapy device into the cancer area. And being able to do this automatically is adding a huge amount of robustness and repeatability into the planning procedure, which enable to have equity in patient care across the country, which we believe is a very important aspect. Another important area is being able to characterize better prostate cancer tumor, being able to stage it, and more importantly as well, to be able to do what we call active surveillance. We don't want to end up by patient having too many biopsies done on them, or having patient going to surgery unnecessarily too early, while you actually, in the case of prostate cancer, in most of the case, watch and wait in a safe way. And we've been working with Siemens Healthineers to actually develop technology to prioritize properly and identify more early what should be the decision we should make on this patient and avoid unnecessary procedures. Next slide, please. If you want to develop those type of technology, you must have access to data. It's really the first activity, the first thing, and it is a hurdle. And I think I will not hopefully offend any of our NHS colleagues, but getting access to data within the NHS is hard, it's difficult. There is a lot of regulation around. So we have to be quite inventive, and we build innovative models to get access to those data, and to make sure we do that while keeping the patient informed, the patient part of the decision-making of giving access to some of those data, to develop technology which will end up by being product. And it's important to keep in mind that we must create product with those technology. And when you create a product, it must be regulated, and therefore it must be going through an industrialization, a commercialization phase. And therefore there is always a partnership between the public and the private, which needs to be handled carefully. So our data access framework has three components: contracts, committees, and compliance. And our contract include a collaborative agreement in which our hospitals and university are signing up to when they join the center. And then we have a developer agreement, which is a template, which is completed every time that we agree to do a new project. And it includes the ways that those data are going to be shared, what is the purpose of those data, how they're going to be used, how the hospital will be compensated for sharing those data. And all of those projects are going to be reviewed by two key committees. One is a center management committee, which includes the center executive, which has all of the representatives of those partners from the NHS and from the university. And then we'll consider, the center management committee will consider any new project that should be added into our ever-growing portfolio. And then we have our data allocation committee, which include our clinicians, include data governance experts, which include members of the public, and we will ensure that we actually do comply with data protection standard, and that this project is ethical. It's actually a worthwhile project to do from a clinical and scientific and public perspective. And I think it's really, really important that we have those conversations, those open conversations with our patient, with our industry partners, and with our clinician, and we make sure that we put our effort on the right project, which will indeed ensure that we are doing a project which is actually of service to our institution, basically our civic mission. And all of those data can be as well accessed in a fully or in an anonymized way. I think fully anonymized is perhaps something which doesn't exist. It's perhaps better to talk about pseudo-anonymized. It's anonymized as the best as we can, but it is actually in a secure enclave, and it's a different way to get access to our data, which can be done by having our industry partner coming on site to work with us. Next slide, please. So I was talking about those different areas that we need to tackle, from collecting and standardizing data to the safety and privacy, to the deployment, to the marketplace, and so on. And the first part of basically solving some of those challenges has been through the development of what we call FLIP, which is a federated learning and interoperability platform. And so what this really means? It means being able to move your AI model rather than your data. And that's a new type of philosophy. Usually people will think that all the data needs to be in one single place, and then you will bring your model to this and you will train with all of the data set. What we bring here is a new way of thinking where the model can be trained iteratively by be physically moved into the NHS trust, into the firewall of the trust. So therefore, those data are never exposed outside of the trust. And then you train on one trust, then you go to the next trust and the next trust and so on. And we have ways of collecting those different models together to build a meta model, which is aggregated and create a model which is actually much fairer, much more equitable, with less bias, because you will have been able to see data at a scale that you will never been able to see previously, while preserving privacy and security, which we believe is really important, and hopefully we'll be able to scale this across the entire country. Another important word here is interoperability platform. So I was talking about the challenge of colleagues sometimes in industry coming with a new piece of device to be installed in the hospital. How do you link up into the informatics environment of the hospital is important, and it's challenging. Some people might use different electronic health records. So for instance, GSTT and KCH and the Brompton are going through the transition of going through EPIC, which is an electronic health record, which might be different to another hospital. So how do you get interoperability? And that's really where you use other type of machine learning solution or natural language processing, which enable you to mine and to label unstructured data, to make them structured, and then you can connect them. But very importantly, you can actually query those data at scale across those different trusts without bringing them all together into one single place. And therefore, your model training will happen in a distributed manner within each of those hospitals without moving the data. Next slide, please. And once you have your model which has been trained at scale using Flip, and you've been through our AI evaluation unit, collaboratively working with our industry partners or researchers to assess the quality of the results, then you can deploy it. And this is where the second part of our platform development has really reached a level of maturity, which we're very proud of, and so proud that actually we put this open source recently. And we'd like to thank all of my colleagues, and especially Aris Shuaib, who's been leading some of those tasks here to make it happen. So AID is an AI deployment engine which enable you basically to be fully interoperable with an informatic environment. By having AID into your hospital, you don't have to install any new system. Any single AI solution can become an app into your environment. And that's really, for us, that's a holy grail. We can actually add all of those AI solutions into a single place, and we can then bring it at scale across many, many different hospitals. And this is now a reality. It has been deployed across 3 trusts, and by the end of next year, it should be deployed across all of those 11 trusts, and eventually even more trusts will come. And you can see here the names of the hospital when it has been deployed: King's College Hospital, Guyton St. Thomas, and East Kent University. And we'd like to thank as well all of our colleagues on the informatics side of those hospitals who's been spending time with us to make sure that this can happen. And as we mentioned on the slide, 7 other trusts are on the line now to be developed, to implement AID. Next slide, please. And to finish my presentation, I just wanted to keep in mind really what do we want to achieve, and what will be our legacy, and being able to link millions of patient data across the NHS will enable us to bring AI in healthcare, to make AI a reality. And I think we all, as a society and community, need to realize that the power of AI is going to be in accessibility of those data sets, and we should not hide them. We should, of course, make sure privacy is paramount, and we need to have robustness, but being able to provide all of those data which has been collected retrospectively within our trust to generate those fantastic AI solutions can only be a good outcome for society, and hopefully will help the NHS to go through what has been quite a challenging situation in terms of current patient backlog, for instance, and other matters. Just would like to thank you again and thank my colleagues from the panel, and we'll be very happy to take any questions or to go through a conversation with my colleagues. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Seb, for that presentation. It's always fantastic to see every time we talk about this, the different collaborations that are going on and the growing strength of the AI Centre. I'm actually going to open up my first question to you, if that's okay. So you've briefly kind of talked about this as part of the presentation, but how do you successfully engage both academic and industry specialists when working with the AI Centre?
So that's in fact, I will even extend the question, if I may, to say, how do we engage as well with the NHS Trust? So in terms of the academic, they are the easy ones to engage. Most of the academics wants to be on the exciting part of developing those innovations. Those innovations will need to come to fruition only when you have access to data. So us as an AI center, being able to do all of the challenge or solve all of the challenges of getting the right data at scale, which has been linked properly, is a goldmine for any innovators, any researchers. From the company point of view, the situation is quite the same. However, the added value, the second added value is we can offer them to deploy the technology into those trusts. And if you talk to most of the medtech companies in the digital health world, the challenge is quite often about being able to have a demonstration, a proof of concept that the technologies they develop is actually making a difference to patients. And unfortunately, we are still living in a world where most of those technologies are in a vacuum, in a parallel world, until at some point, someone will decide to take it up. And quite often, those take-up happen far too late. They happen while the evaluation has been done by a different company, by a different country, by a different group, when the CE marking has been done independently of our own regulators. I mean, now we have UK CE marking, so we have to go through MHRA each time, but those companies are desperate to be able to have trust to work with, to be able to safely deploy and validate technology quite often before CE marking. And that's, again, something we can offer to them. And we do that by partnership, by co-creation, access to the data, which will improve the quality of the model, and therefore improve, hopefully, the quality of the care that we can provide. And then for the NHS Trust, the engagement is about how can we make all of those different processes more efficient, how AI can really transform the way that they provide care, how can this save time? You know, we're not there to replace, we are there to make every single clinician a superhuman. That's what we're going to do. We're going to remove some of the thankless tasks, and quite frankly, you know, you rather much prefer to spend time to look at a patient who has unfortunately a disease than to look at a patient who is actually just worrying and not having any disease. And this concept of being able to provide an early stage of early identification of normality, for instance, in radiology, is a huge opportunity for radiology, and therefore a huge opportunity for the NHS. But this is one example on imaging, but there is many more.
Of course. I think that's fantastic. And I love, one of the things I really love about the AI Centre is that co-collaboration across the different, you know, industry, NHS, and kind of looking at academia. Thank you so much. For my second question, I'm going to hand over to George. George, if you wouldn't mind, once I've asked my question, if you could just briefly introduce yourself for the audience. But how easy and hard has it been communicating, engaging with those without a background in computer science, so e.g. NHS, trusts, or and clinicians, in conversations around clinical AI? How have you tackled this?
Of course. So I'm Jorge Cardoso. I'm a reader at King's, but also the CTO of the AI Center. And actually, training clinicians and clinical support staff, nurses, has been really paramount to everything that we do. We created a full training program that we have been delivering for the past couple of years, and more actively even now, to be able to upskill the workforce to really understand what AI is, what it can and what it cannot do, so that we can start speaking some of the same language and we can help transition to this new future. And the training programs that we have are multi-tiered, so you can either only learn the very foundations of what AI is and what it isn't, or you can actually upskill yourself all the way to be able to actually understand what the algorithms are doing, so that you can be part of the assessment and validation of these algorithms and communicate all of that in a more advanced fashion. This has happened within the workforce, but more effort needs to be made also from our side in terms of engaging even more than what we have done so far with patients, with patient carers, to make sure that everyone is comfortable with this new phase for healthcare.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, George. I'm now going to hand over to David. So again, if you could introduce yourself to the audience, but you have experience, or I know you have experience kind of in other computer science industries. What are the specific industry challenges you have found in healthcare AI compared to other projects you've worked on? So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. This is Bericat. I'm with NVIDIA Product Management in the Healthcare Business Unit, and I also have the privilege and honor to be in the MONAI Medical Open Network of AI as the Clinical Deployments Working Group co-chair with my friend and colleague Haris, aka partner in crime, and obviously George. This is a big question, but I'd like to start by a disclaimer. When we say healthcare AI, that is a big bucket with different levels of maturity, right? It's not the same going to the holy grail of precision medicine, drug discovery, medical imaging, and things that are happening in clinical deployments at hospitals. So each of them have their own nuances. I'm going to focus on the latter only because of the nature of today's audience. I spent 8 years in Red Hat, the #1 open source company in the world, working with everything from telecommunications companies, financial services, energy, industry 4.0, manufacturing. I would say that what they do is they have a higher tolerance for risk than in healthcare, for obvious reasons, right? They find an applied innovation model where everything is about impacting the bottom line and the operations first. So they have the money, the skills, the talent, and the people to do this. They don't have the policy burden to try. They know that they're gonna break it and fix it probably 3 or 4 times before they make it right, and they're okay with it, right? They can do it, and they're not highly regulated. In healthcare, though, it's almost like you have to innovate with a high level of certainty. You need to know that 80% of what you're doing is going to work before you even try it, because you have one shot at building trust with the clinical community and also with the patients. So you can be that aggressive innovating. Also, innovation happens a little bit in silos, to Seb's point. It happens in academia and research, and then it's a huge jump to do translational research to the clinic. That's something that we don't find in other industries. And I would say that also, from the AI standpoint, the use cases are very different. It's not the same having something as a stroke use case that somebody goes to an ER, they have to ask one simple question as fast as possible, versus doing a lot of questions for a huge pool of studies and trying to find things like patterns. So the nature of the use cases are also very different. Lastly, I would say that the business model in healthcare is still TBD. There's not a clear definition of value. It's different for diagnosis or operational use cases, and we haven't found a model that the cost pays by itself. And I'll give you an example with energy. In energy, I worked once with a company in the US, one of the biggest ones, that if they build their own roads, they know that if they build a road 2 kilometers to the right to optimize the traffic of the transportation of their oil, they save $200 million. So just with one road, it pays for all the innovation for the next 2 to 3 years. We don't have the luxury of that in healthcare.
Thanks very much, David. Now, coming at a slightly different point of view, Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you because I know you're part of the first cohort of the AI clinical fellows. So from your experience, and maybe from your own personal experience and those from your colleagues, how do we improve engagement with frontline clinicians and staff with initiatives like the AI Centre to try and build AI more into kind of mainstream NHS?
Hi, yeah, thanks for that question. So I'm Sarah Blake. I'm a cardiology registrar at Guy's and St Thomas's, and I'm one of the first cohort of the AI clinical fellows working with the AI Centre. And at the moment, I'm currently deploying an AI algorithm in a hospital in East Kent that analyzes chest x-rays in the emergency department. And so for the success of this project, clinician engagement has been absolutely essential. And I think there's a couple of levels of clinician engagement that we have to consider when we're thinking about deploying AI software. So there's like AI clinical fellows like myself, I'm getting a lot of education and training in AI now through the initiative. And this means that I'll have expertise to choose, deploy and monitor AI software, which can then be put into practice in the NHS. And so I think we need to have a lot more initiatives like that, expand it over the whole country, which I think is what's happening with the next cohort. I think this allows these clinicians to form a bridge between those working in the trusts so that they can actually see the benefits of AI software and how it can actually be used practically to answer clinical problems. And I think then there's another level, which is all the clinicians who are going to use this software. So everyone who's working in a hospital who's going to use the software is going to need some degree of training and understanding about how it's used. And unfortunately, at the moment, there's quite a lot of myths and distrust of AI, which I think has to be dispelled by proper understanding, which comes down to clinicians like myself who have been trained or are being trained, understand the software, to then go and show how it works, how accurate it is, and how it can actually be incredibly useful in the future of the NHS for us. So I think we need to sort of be training clinicians on both of those levels, depending on how much they want to engage, and also constantly get feedback from them to make sure that we're actually answering the questions, the clinical questions that they have, and get the feedback to see if these algorithms and this new software actually improves the patient's care. Because that's, once you can show that an algorithm or a bit of software can improve the patient's care, you will automatically get the engagement of the clinicians. And that's where we need to start, really, I think.
Fantastic, thanks, Sarah. Questions just popped up in the chat, which I think is a really fantastic follow-on question. So what are you doing to build knowledge of AI that doesn't work or that doesn't work well? Information from other centres being shared? So just from your experience currently as kind of an AI fellow.
So sorry, the question is what doesn't work?
What are you doing to build your knowledge of AI that doesn't work well? So we've got a lot of knowledge that we know things are working well. Is there anything in particular doing to learn more about AI tools that do not work well?
So to learn more about AI tools that don't work well. So I think, essentially what we're being taught is how to evaluate any AI software and tell whether it works well or doesn't work well. And I think this is sometimes where you get a AI engineer saying, oh, but the sensitivity and the specificity is amazing, this must be good. But actually, when you put it into practice, it doesn't change anything for a patient. It doesn't change their outcomes at all. So I think that's where the clinician has to step in and say, okay, well, this may be an amazing bit of software, but is it actually practical? And that's where we have to decide which ones actually get deployed into the NHS.
But can I, if I may, Yasmin, can I interrupt? Especially looking at some of the comments from our audience, saying, for instance, 80% bar is really very low. I will say to Anna that if you look at, let's say, something like ultrasound fetal screening, the bar right now, the target detection rate in the UK on national screening program for something like a cardiac disease, congenital heart disease, or diaphragmatic hernias is in the order of 50 to 60%. Yeah, so you will miss it half of the time. So if now I've got an AI solution which detects it 80% of the time, I'm much higher than any of the experts. And on top of it, there is only 19 of those experts right now in the UK who actually can detect those and can do those screenings. So I completely agree that we want to have it 100% right, but we have to realize that humans are still making mistakes, or sometimes they are missing things. So we need to be aware of the caveat, but I think we need to realize as well that we have a long way to go just only using human screening.
Thanks, Seb. I think that's really helpful to kind of a helpful addition. George, I see you've got your hand up. Have you got an
Yeah,
addition?
the only thing that I wanted to add on top of what both Sarah and Seb said is that algorithms are becoming increasingly good at knowing when they don't know and knowing when to defer their decisions to clinicians. So we tend to think about AI as the catch-all term that will act on every single situation. But algorithms are becoming increasingly good at figuring out when they actually don't know and to say they need help, they need a clinician to look over this, they need a second pair of eyes. So those kinds of strategies can make AI a reality much sooner while we keep on improving accuracy, while we keep on collecting the evidence to show that they work. Learning to defer becomes incredibly important.
I think for my next question then, it follows on quite nicely. So I'm going to hand over to Harris, based on part of this conversation and from your experience. Is it easier, better to establish an AI ecosystem from the bottom up or the top down? Obviously, you've worked on lots of different levels. So I'll hand over to you.
I think it's very obvious from what Seb introduced at the beginning and what people have said in their responses so far that it needs both, right? I mean, none of the fantastic work that my colleagues have delivered would have been possible without the significant investment from Innovate UK and Office of Life Sciences and some of the other big national initiatives like MONAI, for example, as well, which is an international collaboration. But then it also needs, like Seb pointed out as well, frontline staff in informatics, in IT, clinicians, medical physics teams like my own, to meet them sort of halfway. And in reality, for it to be truly successful, you need both sort of the bottom up and top down. And that's why it makes our success rather unique, because obviously you see, you know, in the States, significant investment from private companies, but sometimes there's not quite the same contribution from academic and health science centers there. And that's why I think we've been particularly successful. The other aspect that other colleagues have done well at is engaging some of our regulatory bodies. So I don't think Seb mentioned, but we have a HRA approval for our federated learning platform, which I think is the first of its kind, potentially in the world, definitely in the UK. And that's thanks to our continued engagement with the Health Research Authority. Our development work on aid has meant that we've had to collaborate relatively closely with the MHRA to make sure we're on the right side of the medical device regulations. So it's not just top down, bottom up, but every side as well.
Fantastic. And like I've already said, it's fantastic to see the way that the AI Centre has kind of collaborated and kind of evolved over time. So I'm going to start opening up the questions to the audience. So if anyone does have any, please put them in the chat. But if I go to one of the first questions on my screen, from Nigel. So the theory is important. We also need practical examples. Can you tell us a few practical stories that illustrate the theory? So if I open that to the audience. That means my panel, sorry. Seb, I don't know if that's something you want to answer. I did see Sarah take her mic off, so maybe Sarah, from your experience.
Yeah, I can
go to you.
Absolutely. So I mean, just to explain the project that I've been allocated for the AI Fellowship, which is a project which basically integrates an image interpretation algorithm that looks at chest x-rays and simply labels them normal or abnormal immediately and puts that next to, in a kind of provisional report next to the image. And the idea behind that is that the emergency physicians in the middle of the night will get an idea of whether there's an abnormality or not. And that's not that, you know, they can't interpret a chest x-ray, it's just a kind of backup if they miss something, and to kind of help to make sure that no patient's sent home with a kind of diagnosis that's then later picked up a few days later, because in this trust, all the chest x-rays are then reported by a radiologist. So it's an ideal setting to deploy this type of algorithm, because we've got this kind of backup where we can check the work of the algorithm whilst we're deploying it to see how accurate it is, and if it actually prevents any patients being sent home when they have a pneumonia that needs treating the same day or some other pathology. So that's quite a good practical example of how the algorithm an AI algorithm helps to detect pathology and helps the ED physicians.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
So interesting hearing the kind of the stories on the ground. Does anyone else on the panel want to give another example? Or shall I move on to the next question? Yeah, okay. Hannah Sophia, you also asked a question. So are you interested in explainable AI, XII, and AI for ethics? How do AI or tech companies understand where the gaps are in the NHS for AI? Harris, have you got any suggestion?
Yeah, so they're two quite separate questions. One is around explainable AI that I know some of the other panelists might have strong opinions on. I think the NHS has not done a very good job historically of communicating its needs to the market, right? And letting people know what are the problems that we think could be solved with AI. And I think there's another comment later on about, the focus around imaging. Even though we are the London Medical Imaging and AI Centre, we've quickly expanded beyond that in terms of the data that we deal with, because we realized actually there's a lot of impact to be made beyond just image diagnosis, which is where a lot of the early work started on. And so I think there's a serious onus on hospitals, and why it's important that there is bona fide engagement from the NHS, and not just engagement, but in fact leading the agenda in initiatives like the AI Centre, to make sure that when we then do engage with commercial partners, they are directed to the needs of the hospital, which will eventually be the commissioning party anyway. In terms of explainable AI, I don't know if I should hand over to George for that, but my perspective as somebody who's responsible for the safe deployment and use of AI in clinical pathways, I think potentially explainable AI can be a bit of a red herring or a misnomer. What's important is that we, as much as possible, thoroughly understand the behaviors of an AI algorithm, and we set up appropriate processes to catch failures and to escalate them appropriately. Potentially chasing explainability, particularly at individual result level, I think it's going to be hard to catch. But I don't know, George, if you have a point on that.
No, I would completely agree. And if we think about humans make a decision, we normally like to think about clinicians as being perfectly rational subjects, right? But a lot of clinical decisions are made by intuition, right? And we accept that there's some leeway in terms of that intuition. And the same exists when it comes to models and algorithms. It's important that we understand the edge cases, when they can fail, when they can defer, and how certain or uncertain they are about their decisions. But saying that we can only deploy an algorithm if the algorithm is purely explainable kind of goes against what the premise is. I can explain why some decision has been made and the decision still being completely wrong and still harm the patient, right? So explaining why a decision has been made doesn't necessarily bring you any closer to have something that can help patients and minimize harm. It just gives you some sort of introspection as to why that might have happened, which doesn't mean that itself could be a logical thing to explain.
Fantastic, thanks George, that's really helpful input. Just kind of thinking, we've spoken quite a lot already about kind of the NHS and different projects that we're working on, but I just thought I'd ask David a quick question, just thinking it from the industry side. So obviously you're in partnership with the AI Centre, but from your perspective, how has the AI Centre successfully brought together industry, research, and kind of the NHS, kind of from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. That's also a big question. In my opinion, the difficulty what we're trying to do here is this: we tend to think it's an ecosystem. It is not one ecosystem. It's probably 4 or 5 different ecosystems blended together, right? And what the AI Centre has done, and parallel job, I think my role is global, so I get the privilege to work with people all over the world. I haven't seen any consortium with this structure that have been able to bring the whole value delivery chain all together under the same umbrella. You have hospitals, you have academia, you have AI providers of algorithms that have gone commercially through regulation, software partners, hardware partners, that then you have AI infrastructure, networking, storage, cloud, medical instruments, services. So you can take all these complex solutions and bring it to the hospitals. It's really quite a large number of stakeholders that have to work together nicely to deliver the value at the end of the day to the clinical community and to the patients. And that's really, really difficult to do. So that's something the AI Center has done very nicely. The other thing that they've done very nicely is they chose the players with very good eye. We all are, or I like to think, good people that follow the same values, rally under the same mission of bringing technology to care for ourselves and our families, in this case in the UK, but this is a worldwide initiative. Same values around purpose-driven, transparent, open, that gives you the open source blend. And in NVIDIA, for example, we have a mantra that is, we like to think that we're one of the few companies, if not the only company, AI company, that works with every other single AI company in the world. So I like to think that when you put all those things together with the structure that the AI Center has put under the same values and with the same mission, I mean, it's just, I haven't seen that in any other part of the world. So kudos, it's a privilege to be part of it, and we just need more of this.
Such a nice comment. Thank you so much, David. Just having a look at the chat, it also follows on slightly from what Shazia has put. So kind of brilliant to hear about these projects. Would like to see more projects that are not related to clinical imaging. Also getting wider clinical awareness of what AI can achieve might initiate expansion into yet unexplored clinical problems. I know most of my immediate colleagues at GSTT will not even have heard of the amazing AI Centre, so I definitely think there's room to increase engagement. So I just thought I'd open up the floor, thinking about how as an AI Centre you want to engage more with different colleagues and kind of getting examples. I know that obviously the AI Clinical Fellow is a fantastic start in getting people on the ground, but I just thought I'd open up. Harris, I don't know if you've got any comments.
Yeah, I'll start, but I'm sure Seb has some views on this as well. I think the reality is that healthcare and AI separately are enormously difficult businesses, right? And even though we have had significant investment and significant contribution from our partners, like David pointed out, in reality, this is a long journey, and the roadmap is long. And we've just started, and I explained how we started in medical imaging largely because of the technology we inherit from other industries and the research we inherited from other industries as well, and the sort of advent of GPU-driven AI and the rest of it. But the ambition, like I said before, is to serve the entire healthcare spectrum and all or as many clinical pathways as we can. But it's going to take us a lot of time and effort to get there. And we're now slowly turning into that phase of growth, I think. But the bigger we grow across the hospital, the more partners we'll need, the more clinical engagement we'll need. And so that's going to be a gentle transition to make sure that we build on our successes rather than put them at risk. Seb, what do you think?
Thanks, Harris. I think it's important to be humble, and it's important to face the reality of the cost of deployment at scale. I know that for people in the communities and in the public, if you are saying that you have received in a total of 26 million pounds, which is what we receive over 2 grants to support this activity, if you have any colleagues on the audience today who have been delivering products at scale, they will know that what we're talking about is a drop in the ocean, unfortunately. It is an extremely expensive environment to actually develop things in this context. If you now try to normalize this by the amount of data that we manage to capture and to link together, it's basically £2 per patient, even less. that it costed, right? So it is amazingly cheap. And that's the unfortunate part, is when you are lean, you can't really scale up so easily, and you can't really start to, have 200 partners. We already have too many. We already have, unfortunately, too many, in a sense that we can't really cope with all of the demand. So we want more partners, but we need to continue to bring support. I'm not making an appeal for all of our colleagues to donate some funding to the AI Center. Never mind. But we need to just be honest with ourselves. We need a huge amount of investment to be able to scale this. So what we want to do is to demonstrate the value of what we have been delivering. We have an opportunity to link all of those trusts. We have an opportunity to deploy, thanks to loyal partners, SMEs, startups, spin-outs, and multinational, that this has a value to the system. And once we have demonstrated this, we are really believing that we will go to another phase of growth, but then we will need government support as well. This cannot happen just by a private investment, especially in the current environment we are in the UK. So again, I'm not making an appeal for colleagues to actually donate money, but I'm just saying that we have to be very honest with ourselves. And I was seeing David smiling when I was saying how much money we're talking about. I mean, anyone developing software will realize how much we're talking about. I mean, it is really important to keep that in mind. So yes, we could end up by having a legacy and say, off you go, which is exactly why we decided purposely to go for an open source solution. Because if we end up in a situation that we cannot continue to carry on with the current investment and we cannot really secure more, we have an opportunity to bring this to the community and to hopefully have other colleagues taking it forward. But hopefully, we can do both. We can support the open source community. We can bring more support from developers across the globe. We can work with many countries, but as well we can get, I think, what we deserve, I think, is more financial support to continue to extend and expand this, because we do believe federated learning is the future of digital health and AI.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Seb. Very conscious of time. I'm going to ask one more question that's actually just popped up into the chat, and I think it follows slightly on from what kind of Seb was saying. You've had great success in integrating Flip and Aid into legacy IT workflows. Can you speak to key strategies there? Is it mostly top-down, changing KPIs of PACS administrations to incentivize AI adoption? How does the bottom-up work here?
Perhaps Iris can actually have a conversation about this, because I think you will be surprised. It's actually very much bottom-up. If clinicians don't want it, it's not going to happen. Iris.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And particularly with Aid, the reality is, as a deployment platform, is there was a bunch of activity that was waiting to happen. We had at a similar time the NHS X AI Award, which funded, I think up to date, something like £105 million worth of deployment and evaluation activity. And all of that incurs costs on local institutions, right? Because they have to support the integration and deployment of those technologies. And so even before we get to the clinical workflows, from an IT infrastructure and spend perspective and a PACS informatics perspective, it immediately simplifies your deployment infrastructure and cost and management overheads. And then once you get to the application on the platform level itself, being able to see every AI execution and to manage any failures and to review any sort of interim results, all of that becomes sort of immediately valuable. And that's not to speak of the top-down sort of strategic investment of having sort of a harmonized platform across a wide geography. And I think it's similar to Flip, and perhaps George can say a couple of words about that, where there is a huge amount of demand from just everyday researchers to be able to scale up their data sets that they're using for their research. And what it actually does, as opposed to being a risky bet, or an investment for the future, it's actually also solving the problems of today. George.
Yeah, really good. The only thing that I wanted to add on top of that is that we've seen in the past couple of decades, top-down approach is not really working very well when trying to promote very large IT programs, primarily within the NHS. And I think that's a question of trust, it's a question of engagement, it's a question of making sure people are properly trained and they feel that they're part of the journey. So we decided from the very outset of the AI Center to bring everyone on board so that every technical decision and every decision on how are we going to normalize and harmonize data to be able to link up and deploy these systems and where are these systems going to live, the governance around those, all of those were driven by all of the stakeholders and all of the hospitals in the AI Center. And because they always felt part of the journey, we felt a lot less resistance than you would if it was coming from a top-down approach. But what we're seeing now is kind of a very interesting new step. We're seeing all the trusts that are partnering or that are used to work with all of these trusts that are already working with us, starting to ask questions, can we be part of it? Can we have some part of the technology? What is needed for us to extend that technology here, right? So it does seem that this bottom-up approach allows for this more kind of a pandemic type propagation of technology rather than something that is imposed and then it just finds a lot of resistance when you actually try to implement it in the real world.
Fantastic, thanks, George. Very conscious we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask my colleague if they can launch a poll. Nigel, I do see your hand up. If you want to write your question either in the chat, we can make sure that the panel has time to answer it. We can get that back to you, or you can ask us on Twitter. But just kind of going out to the panel, any final comments from David, Sarah?
From my end, it's a privilege and an honor to be part of this initiative, and we just want to do more, better, and faster with everybody's help. So we're just getting started.
Fantastic. Sarah, any last words?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It's a real privilege, and I think this type of webinar is exactly the right kind of platform for engagement, and we just need to do more of the same, really, and make sure we're getting feedback so that we know what kind of clinical questions people want answered and how we can engage with them.
Fantastic. Any final words, Seb? No?
Just wanted to thank our audience to join us. I mean, I will agree with Sarah. It is a great way of making sure we are outreach and we engage with the communities across the UK and beyond. Nice to see that we have people from overseas who actually joined this webinar, and yeah, we will be very, very delighted to discuss about any further collaboration, partnerships, interactions with other part of the international landscape, bearing in mind that we only have 24 hours in a day and we are limited in staff.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for the audience for joining us. Like I say, if we haven't had a chance to answer any of your questions, please do reach out via Twitter. We've got 1 minute left, so if you do want to write them in the chat, we can make sure we get those. We'll go back to the panel and make sure they get answered. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to my lovely panel for being part of it. Thank you very much to the audience for asking some such fantastic questions. Thank you very much.